mentioned, George is in Greece. So my name is Kelly Ireland, and I'm hosting today with speakers Shane Sewell and John O'Sullivan. And Natalie is here as well to support with the presentations. We'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians and First Peoples of Australia and their continued connection to the country and culture. And we pay our respects to elders past and present and to all First Nations people. So welcome everybody and thank you for coming along. Next slide. So today we're doing A-SPEC and Shane is managing A-SPEC. He's from Miller Merrigan.
It's R-Spec.
We did A-SPEC last week. So today we're doing R-SPEC, which is R for roads, and you will get some CPD for today if you attend, and for those surveyors who need FPET points and other points like the ones in WA, you'll get 2 general education points. So let us know if you need a certificate of attendance and we'll make sure you get that. Keep your cameras on if you can, because it's nice to know who we're talking to and say hello. If you're dialing in and you have to take a phone call, please hang up and then come back. Otherwise, we get your whole music, which is pleasant, but can be hard to talk over the top of. Live Q&A, so please, as I said, interrupt, ask questions, or put it in the chat and we'll ask it for you. And the live polling, so we'll be doing the mentees. There'll be a QR code for those who have missed out on the QR code so far, and you'll be able to answer those questions if you can. That would be great. So,
hi Kelly, I'm working from home today, so I mentioned my gardening in the past. So I've got some orange and a lemon here.
John is an avid gardener. He has like a mini orchard in his backyard. It's insane. So I'm going to hand you over now to Shane. And Shane, if you could introduce yourself with a bit more information, that would be great. And yeah.
Yep, well, no worries. Hi, everyone. So I'm Shane Sewell from Miller Merrigan. And today I'll be facilitating this forum with the help of Kelly, Michael, Gaby. Just please bear with me. Public speaking isn't my forte, but I'll do the best I can for this forum and to help George out. For those that don't know me, I have a strong survey background. My entire career has been in asset recording, which is quite rare. I started at a company called Pintech over 2 decades ago. They were then bought out and I moved to Miller Merrigan. I started as a field surveyor and I've worked my way up through drafting, and now I'm the asset recording department manager. We have a team of 8 at Miller Merrigan, 3 field surveyors and 5 draftees, and we do approximately 800 submissions a year, so we sort of know what we're doing. But it's always good to be involved with the community. I'm a huge advocate for the A-SPEC standards. Not only did we test the first D-SPEC data for George, we went out and did the survey, gathered the pipes and pit information and sent it off to see how it could be presented to councils and formatted in the A-SPEC standard. But I've also been a part of this community since its inception. My contribution has always been helping nudge the A-SPEC's standards to meet the various council and water authority requirements whilst maintaining like a realistic approach, just from a survey perspective, meaning like what can actually be captured in the field, what we can realistically obtain, and then what information needs further research from contractors, designers, etc. Today we will cover the what's so right now with a few community clarifications and interpretations of R-SPEC. Gaby will be doing his tech tips, but with a twist this year, so stay tuned for this. And our community presenter will be John O'Sullivan from the Business Development Manager Australia for Thinkproject. And finally, what's next or where to now. This year, with the settling down of the changes in the specifications, we have turned our attention to governance discussions, and we'll be covering that off a bit later. If you have attended more than one forum this year, you'll notice governance has been a feature throughout. But first things first, who's providing the data in the new version that was released in September last year. There's a poll.
We don't have any choice.
Yes, that's my thoughts. Would anyone like to share their experience of the transition between the old standards and the new if you're currently using it? Maybe.
Infuriating?
Infuriating. Okay, that's not what we want to hear. As we're AutoCAD users, so it was relatively easy for us. Mostly code updates and a few object data tables. Obviously depends how you create your GIS data if you're a surveyor. I have no understanding of the council side of things, but it was fairly easy from our perspective. We just set up a new template and we updated some of the CUI programming that automates our processes and for drafting. And it was just catching all the overlapping jobs that were half drafted and not finished when the standards were released, where we had to export them all as if they were finished and then port them in and then update the new codes and things. So it was a bit tedious, I'm not going to lie, but it wasn't too onerous. So we got 7 that are using it or providing it, 5 no and 5 considering. That's good. Next slide. So who's requesting the data for the new version? So this is for the councils. Next poll. Yep, thank you. So 1. From a surveyor's perspective, we find we have to provide the latest specifications. We don't know which authority has and hasn't made the change, and for fear of rejection, we've just had to keep up with the standards. So anything you get from Miller should have the latest 2023 released codes. So 3 using. Does anyone want to reach out and describe it from a council perspective or authority? Nope. Okay. We'll get you warmed up eventually.
Just can
so
I
everyone
ask a question, Shane?
Sorry, yeah, go for it.
Yeah. What are they doing with the data that's been provided in the old standards? Local governments, that is.
Well, that is a good question. I assume
It's very different. Some areas.
some of it is very different, but I assume like the codes remain the same or just slight updates. So I imagine they integrate it somehow behind the scenes. When they do come over, they can link the relevant fields. Did someone from council or an authority want to speak?
Yeah, I don't know what it's like from a council perspective, but when setting up tables in map info, it's easy enough to amend the table structure just using map basic functions between, say, the old and new specs. Although we haven't had to provide them yet, but dealing with councils regarding that's almost been like pulling teeth.
Yeah. If you don't mind me asking, John, what software do you use?
We use sort of list CAD for processing field work, MicroStation for the CAD side of things, and Map Info for the GIS side.
Yep. Okay.
Most the same as us, John.
Yep. We're solely AutoCAD. We do everything in AutoCAD. Yeah. It's AutoCAD map, I should specify, that has the GIS components and can export shape files. Okay, I don't think we're going to hear from any councils, so we'll move on. So this is, everyone should be familiar with this layout. This is the standard, the new DDS version for new works. So this has been in the standards since the beginning, with column for the item, the data type, max length, comments, description, and any validation that's needed. And with the new specs, it was heavily discussed last year. This is an example of an existing version. So you'll notice on the far right, the right column, there is now a code for what's required, and C is a core requirement, O is for an optional requirement, and YR is required but may require more research. These existing assets are typically for backlog data capture, backlog sewers, existing sewers that were built previous to the A-SPEC standards being released, and specific projects to verify assets in the field. The expectation when migrating legacy data to the D-SPEC structure, because not all fields will have the same values. So you can use, you can fill out all the core requirements, which you should be able to get. O's like optional. If you don't have the information, you can leave as the default, and should be clear. I've got a big note in bold to remind everyone that every attribute is required, but the main difference with this existing standard is the value needs to be provided as a default value if it's not required. So hopefully that's clear. What else has GISA and partners been doing? They've continued to look for anomalies, further research on data governance and impacts, updating sample data, updating codes and code lists, updating the code list API, input from users into the specs. There's been more scrutiny on as the number of users increase using A-SPECs, and the more it's used, the more the asset owners delve into the type of information they want, and there's a continued focus on data governance. What does GISA stand for? That's a good question. Kelly? I don't know.
No idea.
Oh.
George is...
I don't know. Right, that's a really good question. I've never asked that in all these
Geographic
years.
Information System Standards Australia.
Oh my God, who said that? Is it you, Dale?
Yeah.
Look at that #1 fan.
Well done.
Anyway.
Yeah,
I'm wondering.
Website.
I'm wondering if it's something like GIS Services Australia or perhaps something like that.
Yep, Dale just mentioned it. I reckon that's what it is. But we'll have to confirm with George, but it sounds right. And it isn't on their website. I've never seen it. Is Gaby online? No.
But he's online. He was just on mute.
Ah, okay. I've got a note. Would you like to briefly talk about the API? I know you've got a section later, but would you like to mention anything?
Okay. I think the important thing for people to understand is that from this year on, and I don't know when exactly it'll kick off, the subscription for councils, your subscription will include access to the web application. The web application is probably the biggest or the important element, but behind that web application sits an API that people can have access to. So you automatically get access to the web API or that web app, so that not the web app API, the web app, so that you can go online and query and submit codes, and it's all about managing your codes. But then you can also utilize the API to extract codes, and you'll always get the latest and greatest codes if you use that. And it comes down as a digital, so you don't have to go and download an Excel spreadsheet, etc. It comes down as an API feed, which if you have a programmer or developer, or if you know how, then you can consume that data directly in other applications.
All right, acronym cracking again. What's an API?
Automated Program Interface.
There you go.
So an API, what it allows you to do is to write a piece of code that queries a database somewhere on the web, and then it gives you back some information, and then another piece of code to consume that information.
Very good. Thanks, Gaby.
Thanks.
All right. Back to the existing and new DDS versions. Just a quick poll. Has anyone undertaken backlog capture for R-Spec? The DDS is the focus on new assets, where the existing version 1.06 is focusing on the backlog and existing assets prior to the A-SPEC standards. Okay, so no one at this point. We have done one for, I think it was Casey Council from memory. We recorded all the assets for an old oval before they built a new oval next to it. So that was quite interesting. And we did realize there's a lot of data you can't get as surveyors, which was an eye-opener, but everything went well. A lot of service detection and opening the old pits, and a bit of trying to find who constructed it. In some cases, there was no records, so there was just no information available whatsoever. So that was our experience.
If I can add something, this is Gaby again. Sorry, guys. So we did one with somebody in WA on buildings. And we found it really hard to get some of the information because it's occupied. So there's a whole lot of information that's already, that's difficult to get in any case, that you're not going to get it. But the fact that the building was also occupied and there's, and other elements around that, it isn't straightforward.
Yeah, it is a challenge. Okay. Clarifications. So there's been an increasing number of clarifications required, mainly due to the increase in maturity and sophistication at the asset or owner level. GISA is often asked to clarify requests when an A-SPEC data capture requirements are varied by one member or another. It is important to note that A-SPEC has not been developed to cover all possibilities, and therefore there is an exception that is communicated to Council that if there is a variation required by one council, then this can be done as a post-processing exercise by that council. GISA acknowledges that sometimes that message is not always retained, particularly when people move on. There is also the possibility for subscribers to the specs to request changes or modifications. GISA then address those firstly with the proposer and then the broader community before implementing. Variation requests. So George wrote this, but I better read it. I want to be responsible with how this is addressed, and so I want to let you all know that this next conversation may be seen as controversial. Please note, as a guest facilitator, I am presenting GISA's perspective. I'm happy to take any questions or comments and have GISA respond to these post the forums. This slideshow shows an extract of some research GISA undertook to identify some of the variations requested by consultants. GISA's position, having reviewed this, GISA's view on these variations is that the majority, if not all, can be addressed as a post-processing exercise by the council. Having said that, GISA is also mindful that the councils are resource constrained and often rely on the goodwill of consultants to do the modifications. GISA sees that it is up to the consultant to choose whether to do these changes or not, and if they choose not to sign off, if they choose not to, sign off should not be unreasonably held off. These are for anything non-standard, any variations that councils request. For the record, GISA advocates that A-SPEC is A-SPEC without anything added or subtracted, and is always open to conversations to refine the requirements. So I'll touch on a couple of areas of this list. GISA offers the following further comments, and I know that Gaby will be addressing this slide as part of his tech tips today, so very interested to see what he presents. The Building Code of Australia, and New Zealand standards and the Disability Discrimination Act have established a mandatory code for the practice and the provision of tactile indicators or tactile pavers. Tactile ground surface indicators are now compulsory in all new and refurbished public environments. In Australia, legislated codes and standards are very specific to the design, installation, and positioning of tactiles. A-SPEC ensures that this requirement is met. Regarding the suggestion of the sign poles, so Council B requires multiple signs on the one pole to be shown as a single feature, not multiple features. And another council, also Council B, signpost height, not sign panel height. There's a difference in regards to the attribute. So regarding the suggestion of the sign pole height, this is a great suggestion, and as you will see on another slide, GISA has taken that on board to address as a future modification to the specs. So as you can see, while there are variations, it may initiate a review for change, so please keep bringing all these to the attention of GISA. And as I mentioned, Gaby will be talking about this later. Transport asset or open space asset. How do we classify these assets? This scenario was presented to GISA recently as a question as to whether road assets or classified as transport assets or open space assets. The position of GISA is that it is up to the council to determine the classification, most likely in accordance with their asset hierarchy. So GISA's response is a road is a road. It'll be covered under R-Spec. Does anyone have any questions or comments on that?
Speaking as a cadastral surveyor, can't the boundaries be the determining factor?
Well, yeah, that's true. Private property and yeah, who owns the assets? But ultimately, the council own these assets, so we can assume that even if it's in a reserve, that it is an asset that needs to be maintained and paid for by the council.
Yeah, well, I guess adding to that, in WA, we have the main roads department that deal with some of our road assets. They have their own road corridors that are clearly defined again by the cadaster, and the cutover line between local government and main roads is most simply the cadastral boundary as well. So
yeah, true. So we have Vic roads here in Victoria. So yeah, same thing.
Yeah, I would agree with GISA that a road is a road. If it's an off-road car park, it still has asphalt curbs, base, sub-base. It's a road. It should be picked up with R-Spec.
Yep, no, that's good. Culverts, minor or major. So this was shown at the D-Spec forum, so we thought it was worth showing again, especially for people who have not attended any forums as yet. This has the potential to create confusion between the D and R-Spec data capture requirements. So a council in WA approached GISA about these two issues. So is this a minor or major culvert? How do we know if a culvert should be a minor culvert or a major culvert? So GISA's response was recommendation this to be categorized as a minor culvert with D-Spec attributes, with some homework to do on your part to confirm. The logic behind this recommendation, major culverts often attract funding from the state road agencies, Main Roads WA, as they are also often quite large and they're instead of a bridge, whereas minor culverts do not and are considered part of the drainage network. So from the diagram, it looks like a typical minor culvert in an urban area. With that being the case, it would have completely different attributes. However, please verify if it fits under main roads criteria for a major culvert for your council or authority. There's a question, how the head wall and end wall differentiated? So the head wall, end walls, in my experience, are separate entities. So you can capture the area as a polygon for the entire culvert, and then you have the pipe running between them. So from one head wall to the other head wall, and then you'll have two polygons representing each head wall as well. So there's 4 components to the culvert. That's how we would present that. Hopefully that answers your question?
I would agree with that.
Yeah. Question 2, is this a table drain? So Gis's response, it is a really good question. Recommendation, this be categorized as a swale with a D-spec attributes and some homework to do. Regarding the swale and table drain, it is a requirement that the contractor provides this and for council to make sure it receives the accurate information. Here, the logic behind this recommendation, swales are typically in urban areas, which this looks like an urban area, whereas table drains are generally in rural areas along a highway. The difference also impacts the type of attributes to be captured. Slide. Safety barriers and data capture. What should I use for the following barriers attributes, please, as I have really needed to submit this category. So foundation type, tie system restraint, and post type for the safety barriers. And Gis's response, while it can't identify from the spec sheet, it will not do as there is no guarantee of what was actually installed and how. We suggest you speak to the organisation person that installed these to get the relevant details to find out the foundation type, tie system, etc. Did anyone want to add anything?
I guess it raises an issue that I've had with R-Spec is the spec has become so broad that it starts to venture into areas that, speaking as a surveyor, the guy out there measuring it up, it starts to reach into areas that I'm just not conversant in, about the tie types or the recipe for the asphalt or whatever. So knowing how to populate those fields and where to even look in, a swath of drawings to dig out the attributes, it becomes problematic, basically, trying to fill it out. And then when the data is served up, the person at the other end seems to know what they're talking about and says, no, you've got this wrong.
Yes.
Sounds like you're familiar with this conundrum, Shane.
Yes, we are. It's hard to remind people that we're surveyors and we deal with position and locating and levels. We're often not engineers and designers and we don't know what makes up a road. I still don't. But the point is we go and then have to get that information from the people that do know that. And that's...
If you can find them.
Yes, well, it is often a challenge, but you've got to generally talk to the road contractor and they'll give you the subcontractor or they'll have the information handy. The head road contractor is always the go-to for us. And if in doubt, go to the construction engineer from the consultant that designed it. And together you come up with the right answers. It's often delays. We find it delays the submission process. Mm-hmm. But it's out of our control. At the point
where everyone's screaming to get paid.
Yep, it is, and that's where you've got to use a default value. And I know George is against it, and we try to get as much information as we can. But speaking from my perspective, an NA or a default value is better than nothing, and it's better than putting in the wrong information as well just to get it passed. So. In my opinion, I think it's just best you put in a default value when unknown, and you can put a comment in the comments, like buried at time of survey or unable to find certain information.
Or go.
But yeah, I find
go and look for yourself.
Yeah, yep. But I find if you let council know, they generally will. If they know, they have some knowledge as well, and they'll tell you what it was meant to be. So they can ultimately choose what they want in their data. They can add it themselves, or they can return it to you to update. It happens more and more. I'm sure John can relate too. Moving on. So this one's about centerlines, pathways, and surfaces. This scenario shows a couple of examples where GISA has audited data and identified some spec issues relating to the center lines of pathways and surface polygons. If you are providing these, be aware that your data will most likely be returned as being non-compliant, so not snapping the center lines to each other. And if you are auditing this data, be mindful of these scenarios as well. GISA recommends that this is the level of rigor is put into checking this line work, as it will increase the confidence in the data and the provider. The reason for it is creating the connectivity of the pathway and the surface seals, so they should all join seamlessly. With surfaces, like road surfaces, you should be drawing the center line to the center line of the other road, and that little segment doesn't have data. It just has no attributes required, but it's joined for connectivity. And in this instance, the pathway is shown, the center line hasn't been snapped properly to join each other, which causes issues in the GIS. Well, this one's a good one. This is one of Miller-Merrigan's. So GISA recently reviewed this example, which was one of our submissions, and provided us with the following feedback. It's in relation to the parking over the surface polygon. So we drafted this with where the grey, the asphalt, curb to curb, but from the FMK, or the flat curb at the start of the parking bay. And we use the parking polygon to capture the parking areas, which was incorrect. So this led to another question with there being curbs up the middle of the parking. Do we use separate surface polygons? So would there be 3 surface polygons for that section? I'm really interested to hear from other surveyors. Have you come across this, and what did you do?
I'm from Western Australia. I would be of the opinion of having 3 separate surface polygons.
Yep, 3. Yep. So the issue with that was surface polygons are meant to be linked with the surface center line. So George asked, am I supposed to create 3 center lines as well?
I think you're overthinking it, really. You know, what's the point of A-SPEC? It's asset management. If the council needs this information for asset management, they need it to know how much surface am I resurfacing, whatever. Having separate, the more polygons you have for that exercise, I think the more complicated it makes it, not to mention the complexity in capturing all of that information, which I guess the thought running through my head is, how's this ever going to be used in the future? Am I spending time on things that are never going to actually be used, or is it just building a fancy digital twin? When all's said and done, the point of A-SPEC is asset management. And if they need to know about the asset in terms of the surface, the simpler the numbers are, the better. The more straightforward the exercise becomes when they're going to repave these areas in the future. They don't need to know, you know, the parking is different to the road. Practically the asphalt machine is going to run over the whole lot. So they just need to know the value of the repaving. So keep it simple, in my opinion.
What happens if the parking area is a concrete? They wouldn't asphalt over that.
Yes.
Well, it's a different material then. It's a different surface polygon. Different surfacing polygon. So
look, I'm from council, and we do show our separate parking bays, whether they're asphalt or concrete, because we have a parking bay renewal program, and obviously if you get a new one, it's going to be a while from there. But if I got that information, I'd be happy, because that's how I would put that into the system. And if I didn't get it that way, I mean, obviously, depending on your experience and stuff, I would just use the A-SPEC that we're given and make it fit our system and what we want to do as a council.
Okay.
Refreshing, Johan.
Yeah.
Yes. Just one of the rules: a pavement must contain a road centre line, and the name of the pavement, the road name on the pavement, and the name on the road centre line must coexist. So to do that as a separate polygon is then going to break downstream rules as well.
Yeah, that's what I thought, but I didn't know.
Yeah, Shane, I've just checked out one of our projects where we've got something like that, sort of asphalt road and concrete parking bays, and yeah, we've got separate surface polygons for the parking bays, which line up with the parking polygons.
Yep, okay. That's good. And that's what we went with in the end. Who's next?
Sorry,
Just a suggestion.
Hi.
Sorry.
there's
Yeah.
a couple of people with their hands up, so if you could just get to that.
Yeah, I am Kumar. Just a suggestion, the gray color asphalt polygon, can it be extended to parking lots also, so that the full area being added into the surface layer, and to recognize the parking bays, two separate polygons be considered as the number of parking bays in the coming into the council? Would that be a good suggestion?
Well, that's what we probably should have done, and that's what I would normally do, and I think that's what Dale said he would do as well, and not worry about the curb in the middle. But as Stephen pointed out from his perspective, he would have needed the separate polygons. It's a bit of a conundrum, and just GISA has advised the intention of the parking area polygon is to only show a polygon on top of the surface layer, so it captures the number of car parks. All the details of the surface is in the surface.
Yeah, the gray color polygon to be extended definitely towards the parking base also, so that it will be captured the full area for life cycle management.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Gaby, you were next, I think.
Yeah, just a comment or a question in terms of that. One of the things that I would always ask is the material that's used for the parking. If very often the material is different, you might have a different subgrade or something in order to strengthen the parking or whatever in the design. And if that's the case, definitely different polygons. But if that's not the case, then I would go with one polygon. That's my opinion. I see Duncan's got his hand up. He's probably got a similar comment or
Yep.
No
worries. Thanks, Gaby.
I've got a very different comment, Gaby.
Sorry, you would probably differ from me, maybe, I wanted to say.
Yeah, I was working with George, and I was probably guilty in putting this together. What the intent of this is that it should be three separate polygons, and there should be three separate road polygons because the road extends under the parking bay. Yep. And they should be separate polygons because quite often the construction details relating to the road under the parking is very different. So for the most obvious one, the parking bays are concrete, the road's bitumen. So therefore you need three separate road polys. The parking bays, you need to think of them as just the line work that's sitting on top of the road. So if you've got a parking bay, and I'll have to review in case they've been changed, but what would happen is if you've got a parking bay there, a series of parking bays, you just go around the outside of the parking bays and you say that there's 10 parks in there. However, if there's a different style of car park in there, so it might be a parking bay that is designated for people with a disability or taxis or something like that, they're separate. But you need to think of it as the line work. It's not the road itself. It's just what that section of road is being used for.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Thanks for clarifying that, Duncan. That's good.
No worries at all.
Well, Dale, last.
If the surface is or the pavement is different, then it's going to go on a different polygon anyway. If the surface, often we find in WA, they just build it out wider for the parking. So in that case, doesn't it make sense for the polygon to include the area under the parking if all of the same specs are used and the same material is used? That was my only comment.
Okay. Yeah, it's worth thinking about, but it's a good one. I'm glad we brought it up.
Yeah, that's how I operate, sort of something similar to Dale. It depends on the surface, because we're engineers as well as surveyors, so if I can just check the cross sections that our engineers do to decide what the shape of the polygon will be. Because if it's let's say if those parking bays were asphalt and the same depth, etc., as the road itself, they'd just all be one polygon.
Yeah, okay. I see Raji's made a comment in the chat, which is also good. Parking doesn't deteriorate like the road, so to keep them as separate assets. Also parking area and surface two separate assets. Valuation point and double the amount. So that's from council perspective, I assume. All right, I think we'll move on. So future changes. These 4 changes are proposed as part of our continuous improvement processes, essentially harmonizing requirement across all the specifications. So problem number, we identified an inconsistency across the specs and have moved to standardize the data type. So it's been changed from an alphanumeric to an integer. Height attribute currently for the sign panel to be replaced with height attribute for the sign post. I think there's a poll on that. And then should the eastings and northings be removed or not is another poll that's going to follow this. Proposed creation of the new table, is it required for miscellaneous text? Proposed. Gissa will follow up post these forums. We're keen to see your reviews, so we request that in particular subscribers to the specifications vote through these 2 next polls. So remove height attribute from the panel and add height attribute to the signposts. Yes, no, or have both. A poll. I didn't write these slides, so I can't comment, but it's good. I'll just refresh. Natalie, is that active?
Sorry, I'm just doing it now.
Okay, thank you. And there's one after this one as well.
There we go, everyone. Sorry about that.
All right.
I've got some answers coming through. There we go.
There we go. Okay, so have both. One yes, one no.
Both.
Yeah, a lot for both. Does someone want to talk to the reason for having both from council perspective? It's easy enough to capture in the field, so that's fine. There's no issues our end. No? Fair enough. Well, since 8 want that, I'd say that will probably go ahead. And Arthur, previous data would have to be amended. Probably not. That's what the existing DDS is all about. When changes happen, it'll just come across as -9999. Can be updated manually if council want it, but I don't think it would be a problem. And the next poll, oh, sorry, click too many. Remove easting and northing. This is a good one. I think I know the reason behind this, and I'll take a stab, is because we submit signs, light poles, there is anything with an easting and northing, even pits. The center of the point does contain the easting and northing. So when you're exporting the shapefile, automatically the easting and northing is in the data that we're providing council or the authority. So putting it in the text is just creating a room, like in the object data itself, is just creating room for error, in my opinion, because just to give you a bit of background, our button we use to place signs. You click a point and that places the sign point right there. But say you want to move it, at the point you've clicked, it's recording the easting and northing. You move it, you have to go manually update the easting and northing. So I do think it is redundant, and I agree with you, Dale, which is why it's been brought up. So does anyone want to talk to the no perspective?
I'll just make a comment. One of the things of AS 5488, the subsurface utility standard, is to have the point data as attribution. And the reason why, the location data as attribution. And the reason why is to maintain a mechanism to check that data hasn't moved or shifted. So down the line, something may happen to the data set. And if you have captured the eastings and northings and they are stored as attributes, that's a way to find out and a way to double check.
Okay.
Now that's from AS 5488's perspective. I don't know why it was ever included into A-SPEC, but that's something that's probably a consideration.
Okay, I didn't know that from that perspective, but that's good. I knew there had to be a reason. But as I explained, like if our draftees draw it and then move it for whatever reason, they've clicked in the wrong spot and they forget to update the easting and northing manually, you've got the wrong coordinates as well. So most of the time it works. Dale?
I guess I'd speak against putting it in the attribute data because, yeah, Gabby, you're right. Data does get retransformed as we move between datums. We've gone from GDA 94 to GDA 2020. Any typed attribute data is going to be on the datum that it was put in as transformations happen with time. And I presume this data is designed to survive the test of time. Yes, it will be transformed, but having old coordinate for old systems that people don't necessarily understand in the future, I don't think is helpful. I think it just creates ambiguity unnecessarily. That's all I was going to add. Yeah,
that's another good point.
Yeah, okay, I'll follow up on that then, because if you're talking about transforming over time, wouldn't that impact, say, things like easting and northing attributes in D-spec as well for pipes and pits?
Yep. Good point.
There's eastings and northings all over the specs. There's lots of it. There's pit start and end points everywhere. Trees, there's a whole lot of them that's got that. I'll just answer again from AS 5488. Within AS 5488, it's about the quality of the data and metadata that ensures the quality, and part of the metadata is also the spatial reference that you're using for those coordinates. So the coordinates don't go without the spatial reference. And so in other words, I don't think there can be ambiguity in terms of that, because it's part of the same, there's one field in the next field, etc. And for A-SPEC, the coordinate reference is also stored in your area of works polygon. So it is there as a reference. But interesting discussion. I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Gary. I understand it from both perspectives. I didn't realise. But no, that's good. Very interesting discussion again. We'll move on. Governance. I'll go over a number of examples under these two key areas: data and process. Examples of data submissions. So in the 2019 versions, critical that all assets are provided within the area of work extents boundary. And you'll notice the table starts with permit number. Whereas in the 2023 version, this is no longer a requirement, as there is now an area of works identifier to link all the assets to the specific objects. So you no longer need to have all assets inside the boundary. This leads to the next question is which GISA were asked, how specific is the AOWID? Is the whole project okay, or do we split it into an area of works for R-Spec, D-Spec, and O-Spec? Personally, and GISA's thoughts is to go with the whole project, so just one area of works for all aspects. Further to that, just in our experience, we submit D and R-Spec together essentially, and then O-Spec comes later, so it often has its own area of works area by the time we get to submitting it. Any thoughts on that from anyone?
Yeah, it's something similar with us, Shane. We do D-Spec and R-Spec with the civil works and O-Spec later with the landscaping works, but while we're not using the new specs, just keep them all similar. Or if I was using the new specs, I'd just keep it a constant area of works ID for all three.
Yeah. Okay. So we've done the same. We've adopted the estate oleo, the stage number, and the date of the submission. The only thing that would change is with the O-Spec would change the date, I believe. Any council?
My thoughts I would probably keep a constant date just to avoid confusion between the three and just use a date from the civil works.
Yep. Okay. Fair enough. All right. Move on. Codes and code lists. What's happening for codes to change or new code lists to be created? Typically, GISA will receive the request for a new code or a code list from any A-SPEC user, whether it be council, consultant, surveyor. They would go and check the code, make sure it doesn't already exist. Then if it's not found, they'll find the appropriate code list to add the new code under, create a new code list or just code, and then release it in the next specification review. Please note, typically additional new code lists are only created at a time when a specification is revised. So that's what used to happen. So this is a new initiative by GISA, and we request that everyone become familiar with this process. February this year, GISA communicated with us that they want to explore crowdsourcing codes. Why? To save time, get the codes at the time needed, no delays, and make C-comment redundant. If you attended last year, there was a conversation about the use of C-comment. Well, if we apply this crowdsourcing, no longer need to use C-comment. What's the process? When an opportunity arises, you'll go to the authoritative source, so the API, spreadsheets, or the web app. And this then will give you a search function to search for code lists in the spreadsheet. However, this is not the end of it. Enter the code you want to see if it is used elsewhere. If it does, try another code. If it doesn't, you have your code. Communicate to GISA via the contact form on the website or use the API app. When verified proposed code does not exist, then the code can be used straight away. We had a question last week in the D-Spec about crowdsourced codes, and will they be kept separate from the original codes, the original approved codes? And the answer was yes. Between issuing of the specifications and revisions, they will be kept separate, so you can always know which ones were crowdsourced and which weren't. Does anyone have any further questions?
Yeah, okay, one comment on that, but it's more applicable to O-Spec than R-Spec, and that's things like materials, for example, for, say, seats or playground equipment. Often they're going to be multiple materials, something like, say, timber or steel or plastic or, say, all three. So obviously that's not going to fit in the 10 character limit for code lists. So something like that will have to stay on as C comment.
Yeah, potentially. I can't comment on that. There might be a a material code that suits depending on the asset. An interesting one for George, and feel free to reach out to him to see his opinion. Sorry, in the chats, A-SPEC is already dynamic. What's the point of having a standard if it's always changing? Seems oxymoronic to me. Thanks, Dale. I can't comment on that. Moving on. Asset and asset data handover checklist. So why is this important? We are likely to see this included in the process to identify exactly what asset data is expected at practical completion. The checklist can be found in the overview document and also as a standalone document in the proposed changes section on the A-SPEC website, and is available to be downloaded now. My understanding is there is also a draft fillable PDF waiting approval. This checklist is to be used by both the authority and the consultant, so there's clarity on what is and isn't expected, and there is a place for both parties to sign. My question is, and the next poll is, have you used this checklist yet? Natalie, can I please activate that? Thank you. We haven't used this checklist yet, but we also know what's expected for each of the specs, and we haven't come across any that's vague. No. So overwhelmingly, no one's used that checklist from any side, which is interesting. Quality assurance. GIS's observation, there is continued concern over verifying that what has been built is recorded in the ASCON data. The QA report is about recording variations that have occurred during the construction phase. They provide certainty, confidence, and remove time and effort to verify what has changed. Also to complement the records of officers monitoring and signing off of the works. I personally can see the new QA form will benefit us at Miller-Merigan, where there's significant differences between construction and design, mainly because we're constantly questioned by councils that our ASCON submission doesn't match the design plan. The thought process, as I see it, is always that we've missed something or made an error, but 9 times out of 10, what we've surveyed and captured and submitting is accurate, and what's missing has never been constructed and was omitted from the design. So this will give us the way to advise the authority what's different on site before or while we submit the data. I'd also like you to keep in mind that often the consultant and the supplier of the ASCONs can be a subcontractor. So we're not we are a consultant and we do our own asset recording, but we also do asset recording for other consultants. So it's not always the same company. In my experience, it's good to have an external company undertake the asset recording, because if you left it to all the builders and the people constructing the works, everything would just be as per design, mate. So I think, next one. Continues on. So this is the certification form. This was created to be provided with each data submission to document details about the project. This is submitted as a README file or a CSV with a set of shape files, as all the shape files are named identically. So pit, pipes, prop, same for every job. Without this, council would have no idea what job they're looking at or who did it, other than the email that was sent to them and assuming the sub-project was correct. So it confirms what estate, what works is being submitted, what has been provided, who did it, and when. So combination of these two requirements, from GIS's observation, there is a continued concern over verifying that what has been built is recorded in the ASCON data. GIS have now incorporated this form into the one CSV file. Why? One document provided that covers the project, who delivered it, and what, if any, changes occurred. We see this as a joint responsibility, and we anticipate it will also confirm what council officers have also recorded. This is already available on the website to be downloaded now. And this was interesting. George found this article. He's presented it in the previous forums. This is from Queensland. Certification of ASCONs. Who can legally provide as constructed plans? So monitoring the various forums, GISA has seen two specific instances where this is spoken about. The IPWEA forums, GISA has seen activity about process for handover, particularly capital works, and Queensland, as per this example, registered surveyors certification for as constructed plans. So they're proposing that you need to be certified to be able to create and submit as constructed plans. As a surveyor, I'm interested to hear from other surveyors here today about your views and if it's being discussed in their state, if outside of Victoria, because I know Victoria is not, I've heard nothing. Have you heard anything from WA, Dale?
Oh, no, look, I think Water Corp over here, which has nothing to do with A-SPEC, insists on licensed surveyors signing off on as constructed plans. That's about all that's required in this state. I guess, yeah, the lack of licensed surveyors and the onerous nature of producing A-SPEC data is going to pose some problems if there is a requirement for licensed surveyors to sign off on every A-SPEC. And as you say, they're often done by contractors anyway.
Yep.
Yeah. So, no, I haven't heard any comments about intersecting those requirements.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, as I said, we haven't either. I wouldn't go as far as needing licensed surveyors sign off. I think that's probably a bit extreme. We have that here for Melbourne water submissions, which are the biggest authority, drainage, and they still require marked up design plans and signed off by LS, very formal. But I can see where they're coming from in that having people that know nothing about spatial awareness and positions and levels submitting ASCON data as if it's true and accurate.
And the PAPs don't have PI insurance.
Yeah, and yep. It's a big risk, but on the other hand, I can see A-SPEC have the option to rate the data you submit with the COM1, COM2, COM3. So you can, as long as you're nominating that correctly, I think for the time being, I would just hope no one's putting in COM1 when they're not surveyors or not qualified to be submitting the ASCONs to that high standard. And it will give councils and other authorities the option to say, hey, that's not good enough. I think water authorities and sewer, the water authorities for sewer and water submissions, it's critical. Roads and A-SPEC probably not as critical, different purposes. So we watch this space, I guess. I'll actually I'll put a link in the chat after, which if you want to read this article.
People don't die of cholera if roads don't work.
Yes. Digital Hive has been established to provide a level of technical capability, support GISA's clients and the principal. Gaby is the lead. Gaby, do you want to talk about Digital Hive briefly?
I'll talk about Digital Hive briefly. So basically, we offer technical support to GISA, and we do it under the umbrella of Digital Hive. It suits both of our companies to collaborate and to do it in a partnership environment. So many of you would have had exposure to Digital Hive, and in terms of this work, everything I do is under Digital Hive, and in that partnership. So if you want to know more, go and have a look at that website. It's not a big fancy one, but it gives you an overview of who we are. Enough of that for me.
Yeah, thanks, Gaby. And as I facilitated the forum, just snuck this slide in, don't tell George. If you'd like to get in touch with us in Victoria, and we'll look after your A-SPEC requirements, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Whether you're a council looking for our experience with one of the specs, or if you're a consultant looking for a hassle-free solution and don't want to undertake the asset recording yourself, leave it to us and we'll do it for you. That completes my update for you. I will see you at the wrap up. Over to our community speaker, John O'Sullivan.
Hello, everybody. Can you see me? Yeah, great. How you doing?
You want to share your screen?
Yeah, I'm going to share my screen now. It's been quite interesting just talking to you guys. Let's see. I'll just share. Let's see. Well, see if I can go slideshow here. I'm not sharing, am I?
Not yet. You've got the whole screen, not just the.
Yeah, you're not showing your presentation in presentation mode. That's it.
Yeah. Where is presentation mode?
Yep.
Okay.
Well,
okay. Here we go. So probably just listening to Shane and giving a bit of background. As you can possibly tell, I'm Irish originally. I qualified in architecture many years ago and ran an architectural practice in Ireland for several years before I moved to Australia. Initially, I was in council in Western Australia in the city of Kalgoorlie-Boulder, initially as a building surveyor and then as a project manager and an asset manager. And as part of that, I had the entire Goldfields as an asset project. So I'm vaguely familiar with council. And then 6.5 years ago, I joined a software company, RAM. And I've been managing, basically, we've 100 and something odd Western Australian clients. We've got some in Victoria, South Australia, and then all of New Zealand in terms of roles. So I manage all of our WA clients. So I used this slide recently, it is all about the data. And what I'm actually going to talk about today is essentially a project where the Shire of Augusta Margaret River has come back to us after a number of years using alternative asset management systems. They've had about 36 subdivisions over several years that weren't imported into asset management systems. They were using the A-SPEC servers as storage. So we've got multiple subdivisions across multiple years and across multiple variations of the standard. So that was our issue. And, initially we started off with George and Gaby, and we're looking collectively at how we can manage all of this. I've done some work on R-Spec and D-Spec across various councils, but this is probably the biggest project we've done with it because of basically the number of subdivisions. So in terms of the project scope was to import the historical R-Spec data into our Thinkproject asset manager, formerly known as RAM, but it's been rebranded. I just probably should mention that. One of the issues is A-SPEC, and specifically R-Spec, is a as constructed data standard. It's not necessarily the asset management standard. So we actually have our standard core asset tables in use in WA, particularly. There's a reason for them. They've got certain fields. They don't naturally match all of the data fields that are in R-Spec. So we have to map the core fields together so that the right information goes into the asset management system. And the object of this is to transition the R-Spec data into asset management data that can be used by the council. And why? This is the question. I mean, it was quite interesting hearing everybody talking about the as constructed and dealing with the project. But from a council's point of view, the main reason to get particularly the road data in Western Australia, not quite so sure about other states, is that it's used to report to Main Roads for their IRIS system. And council's grant funding in Western Australia is dependent on it. So if you're getting subdivisions as a council person and you're not reporting to Main Roads, you're not getting grant funding for this. So you're missing out on funding. And that's really important. So in terms of the surveyors, it's like, this is kind of the end of the line. This is why we need all that data to go into the asset management system, and then it needs to move on. So in terms of our process, we looked at importing all our shape files. We've got a system where we can have user-defined tables, which basically we created tables to actually match the current R-Spec standards. So I created them to match the latest. In terms of the overall process, Gaby was building a validation tool, and we had hoped to actually bring all these data sets through the validation tool and get them up to current standards. Unfortunately, because some of them were so old, that didn't work. It may have worked for some of the later ones, but certainly the older ones didn't quite work out. So we just manually imported the data. Now, because there's multiple tables in each subdivision, I did request Gaby to actually compress everything into one set. So for, surface table, I have one table as opposed to 36. Just reduced the amount of import. So at the moment, we've imported all the R-Spec data as is. We're currently reviewing it with the council, which is tricky, and I'll deal with some of that and some of the issues that I've come across. And we're mapping it to our system, particularly the core road tables in our system, the tables that report to Main Roads. They need to be specific. There's limitations on them. For example, surface materials, we haven't got as many as is in R-Spec. So I need to actually define which ones are which, because Main Roads' IRIS system is limited, not ours. So we need to actually put it in the right box for Main Roads. So in terms of the issues that I came across in dealing with this, there was multiple data sets and multiple R-Spec versions, which I'd already mentioned. So we got over that by getting Gaby to compress each data set into one import. R-Spec codes and lookups are not used correctly and consistently, and probably particularly with the older data sets, but there's random stuff everywhere, and that breaks a big data import. So that's part of the validation stuff that we have to find. I found because a lot of the issues, I created my tables and the lookups matched exactly the R-Spec codes. When you'd actually go to import, because somebody had done something wrong in the data or incorrect, it wouldn't import, it would break it. So you had to just change all my lookups to actually just bring them in as text, which is not ideal in terms of moving forward in the systems. And date formats are inconsistent, which causes all sorts of confusion. And records then also in the correct fields. That just the data isn't there. So it was good to see, talking about validation and stuff. It's good to hear you guys talking about that. And then other issues that I think is arising from all of this is there's a lack of a validation process on the receipt of the data. As surveyors, you submit the data and it's fine. You may have development engineers looking at it, but they may not be the asset management system custodians. And it's usually a council process that's lacking, not so much yours. I believe validation should occur on receipt of the data. So if there's any issues, they can go back to the surveyors immediately. Some of the data sets I'm looking at here, they're years old. There's no point in going back to anybody. We have to work it out. So you guys, particularly in the private sector, you're consultants, you've got a job, you do the job, you want to get paid and move on. And that's perfect. That's normal. In council, unfortunately, it tends to be a bit slower. So usually I'd recommend my councillors to actually put in people and processes in the right place to actually make sure they're doing this at the right time. And other issues that I found, particularly with this data, which has caused us quite a lot of issues, is there's multiple names for the same thing. Various subdivisions are called various things. They're called one thing in the data set, they're called one thing in the council's data. Same with street names, misspellings, stuff like that. When we report to Main Roads Iris, they have a list of street names that they've got from Landgate, so they have to line up. And so that's one of the issues. And another one that I've come across is that some subdivisions, probably the older ones, have no area of works and have no construction date. So a lot of the tables, they have data, but they don't actually have specific dates. You have to go to the project area of works to find that. And if you don't have it, I have to find dates, because the asset management system needs dates to actually go, this is when it was handed over, or its construction date. So this is how we can do forward planning based on it. So in terms of our process, we bring in the centre lines. So, and I'm really dealing with roads particularly. So we deal with the centre lines. In this case, you can see there, I've just got a road that I was working actually on last week. The R-Spec centre line is broken up into multiple points, but for our purposes and what the council required, they want a centre line from the start to the end of the road. There's some red asphalt and black asphalt there. They're going to deal with them at an asset management level. And this is the kind of conversation that councils should have. They should understand the data that's coming from you guys and understand how it goes into their asset management system. And usually, unfortunately, that's the bit that's missing. So this is where I'm working with the Shire at the moment to map all this and give them an understanding of it, that they'll actually have that process going forward. So when we create our centre lines, then we develop our carriageway sections. And the next thing I'm working on at the moment is the surface and pavement table update, which is bring the surfaces and pavements directly in. Oh, was up the end. Okay. There you go. So that's where I am. I'll just try and get back and stop sharing my screen. Yeah. So that's basically me.
Thanks, John. That was a good, sharp presentation, as was Shane's. Does anyone have any questions for John? You got your hand up, Dale.
Yeah, no, thanks. Yeah, thanks, John. It's actually refreshing to see that all of the data that we do pour hours and hours of work into is being used. I have a strong suspicion that some of the data sets that I've logged over the years have been, years ago put as a USB stick stuck in a drawer somewhere, and they're still there. But yeah, I've done some submissions to Margaret River recently. I was curious to see whether or not they were in the list, but I can tell you up front that yes, they do use the validator. I've run foul of it about 5 times so far, but it does enable you to get the data that you want. So, it serves a purpose. And if I can see that the purpose, which I understood behind A-SPEC, is asset management, is being that's what the data is being used for, then that's really good to see. But I think it also probably highlights some of the challenges that I see is, if we keep on changing A-SPEC, then the challenges that you've got in trying to wrangle data from different timeframes, different versions of A-SPEC, trying to bring them together into a coherent data set becomes more and more of a challenge. I think, yes, we can add codes for every different variant of bitumen and gravel and guardrails and everything that's out there, but if the data is too granular, then when you're trying to do your big picture asset management, you don't know where to send it all. I think that the asset management aspect of things really needs to be kept in mind whenever there are changes being made to A-SPEC. Otherwise, you're starting to build a system that actually isn't fit for purpose. It's got all of this information that will either never be used or is too confusing to be used for the purpose where it's intended, asset management. That's, yeah.
Yeah, I agree, Dave. So, for example, I referenced the core tables that we use in Thinkproject Asset Manager, or RAM, in WA. They were developed over 30 years ago in New Zealand, and they haven't really changed, and they're not very flexible, and that's been brutally honest. But in New Zealand at the moment, they've developed a new asset management data standard, AMDS, for roads, and this was done by Waka Tukahi, or the New Zealand Transport Agency, and that's been rolled out to all the councils. I think there's 69 or 70 councils in New Zealand. And just to give you an indication of the scale of a major change to an asset data standard like this, it's a 5-year project for us. The volume of work, we're doing so many councils a year. There's a team in New Zealand who just do nothing else. Now that is more flexible, and I'd like to get it rolled into WA, but it's probably going to take years. In terms of our non-core asset tables, anything like pits and pipes, stuff like that, they're editable, so it's easily changed. We can also add fields and lookups, but as you say, it's a management issue. It is, if different councils are using different standards, and if the standard keeps changing, it's a constant battle to keep it up to date. So I'd be more inclined to keep it tight, not change it too often. I think it's actually great that there is a standard, because that's one of the issues I'm dealing with non-road asset classes, is the lack of standards. And I think it's actually great to have a conversation between guys like surveyors on the ground, through to council, through to the engineers receiving it and validation it from the engineering development perspective, but then the asset managers as well, so that it's a circular conversation. I think that's really important. So,
thanks, John. Yeah.
Great, thanks, John. Does anyone have any more questions for John? Excellent, thank you very much. Can I hand you now to Gaby, who's going to do his tech talk? Gaby, are you ready?
I am indeed.
Right.
Just share my screen.
And now's also a good time to pepper Gaby with any technical questions that you may have as well.
Okay. So come on, go into presentation mode. There you go. Right. So I've decided to change the way that we do the tech talk. Normally, what we do is we go and look at some technology aspects, and we've dealt with things like a lot of QGIS. We've dealt with batch processing. We've dealt with automation and APIs and things like that in the past. We've decided to try and change it a little bit, make it a little bit more interesting, because it seems like people are not, everybody's doing things their own way, and for this kind of forum, maybe the format didn't work as well as we wanted to. So today we're going to have a bit of a chat about some of, a project and some stuff that we're doing that might be of interest to people. So I've recently started a project with another company, and when I use the word we in this discussion, I don't mean myself. I mean me as part of that team. So we have a few of these. So that's Mavic 2s and 3s, for those of you who don't know what they are. And we have one of these. That's a Matrice 300 RTK. And that one has got some extra little bits and pieces, which is really interesting. This is a docking station with a little weather station on it. And the docking station allows the company to automatically program this drone. So this Matisse it's a big size drone. It's not the size of the smaller ones, and I'll show you a photo of it a little bit later. But what you can do with this is you can automate it, and these things on the left and right is actually two covers. So the drone goes, it sits itself down, and folds up its little wings, and then these little things on the side automatically fold over it and covers it up, and it's completely safe. The whole thing bolts down on like a table, and so it keeps it away from weather, and it also charges while it's sitting in there. So quite a nifty piece of equipment this is. But what you can do with this is you can arrange for night flights and regular flights at a particular time, daytime flights, but with waypoints pre-programmed and so on. We also have some of these. That's an infrared payload. And a LiDAR payload. Now, I must say that having worked with this now it absolutely fascinates me, and it amazes me at how easy the technology is. These cameras, it's plug and play. You plug the one out, you plug the next one in, and now you've got a whole LiDAR system. And you don't want the LiDAR, you put in the infrared or the RGB. The chap there on the left-hand side is old Eddie. He's our drone pilot, and this is just to give you that picture, is just to give you a perspective of the size of this drone. It's a big drone. We use these drones, excuse me, to do site feature surveys. We do daily ortho mosaics of a particular project area. We also do change detection. So a little bit of background, maybe. The company that deals with this, it's a fair-sized company, and they have a lot of work at the moment. They're building this port, so that port is being constructed. And on the right-hand side, on the left-hand side, you see some agricultural bits, and this is in a third world country or a developing country, and what you're looking at is the project that they engage locals with, and help locals to grow better products, etc. And that's what's interesting for me. And we use the same drone for both of these projects. So weekends we go and do the work in the agricultural field, and during the week we use the automated processing a lot. Now, for both of those, we do change detection. You take a bunch of photos, and then you fly over. Tomorrow you take the same photos, you register them, and then you basically do a mathematical X minus Y, and it shows you the differences. And then you can use other drones or the same drone to zoom in on the differences and to take detailed photographs and imagery of all of the changes, the things that happened between this cycle and the previous one. Okay, and also security. It's a high security area, so they have these nighttime flights where they take imagery because it's got infrared, including thermal infrared. Anytime it sees a thermal signature, the drone is programmed to zoom in and to capture live information, and that gets fed to a control center and makes the security very easy and manageable. Here's just a LiDAR shot that I've stolen from somebody. This is not our work. I didn't get permission to show the stuff that we're doing. But what I wanted to just talk about here very quickly is you can see in this image there's reflectance on power lines. So
excuse me,
plus
Gaby,
there's
just a quick question. Does it have thermal bands as well?
This one has got 5 bands. It's got your RGB, it's got a near infrared, and then it's got a thermal infrared. Okay. All right, I'll move on. the issues that we've had, and I want to talk a little bit about those issues. I don't know whether you saw in that first slide with Eddie, the drone comes with its own RTK base station, and when we do our normal surveys, normal survey work, we use our normal MLID or Trimble GPS units or GNSS units, and then when we try and bring the data sets together, very often there is a mismatch between the two. And so what we ended up doing is to remove the DJI base station, and we've replaced that with the normal GNS ones. MLID gave us the opportunity to talk to the drone, and so when we changed that out, it just gave us better results. So I don't know what's up with the DJI base station. Maybe there was something wrong with our configuration. I don't know about, we didn't get to spend enough time yet to figure that out, but we did get the results we wanted when we linked the drone to the normal terrestrial base station, and gave us the results we wanted. But that also led us to lots of issues to register the LiDAR and the images together. We were using the DJI base, and setting up on different controls gave us mismatches, small mismatches, but still mismatches that was not acceptable. The biggest issue that we had to deal with is just the sheer volume of data. Now, we have a computer, it's an i9 with 34 gigabytes of RAM, and built in, it's got two 4 terabyte hard drives. And we often after a mission, we often have to fiddle and manage data, because the volume of data is just so big, and so you're constantly shifting things around. So that was quite a difficult thing to deal with, and I have to admit, I don't think that we're on top of that part of it. Dealing with the volume of data is something that we have to, in my opinion, something we have to still master. It's really not straightforward, and I share that as an experience. But now the interesting bit. Previous time I spoke about this, I didn't mention this, but we've decided to do an as-built automation experiment. So what we've done is we've taken the design data, basically taken our design A-SPEC. It's not A-SPEC-like data, and we've converted that into spatial data, and we built a geopackage using that. So you're starting off with what is required. That's the design part of it, and then we threw the project LiDAR at it, and the orthomosaics, and lots of RGB images from phones, and as well as from the drones. We focused on road surfaces, parking lots, pathways, and then the tactiles, and traffic management and trees. And so those are basically the feature classes that we included into this little experiment. And we utilized Google Earth's machine learning platform. Google doesn't call it an AI platform, but it is a AI platform. You can, if you want to call it a machine learning platform. It is AI, but it's machine learning because it's very specific, very task orientated. and we try to use this to automate the identification or the building of the as-built. The other software that we used was we're an Autodesk house, so we use a lot of Autodesk stuff. We also use Pix4D, and in QGIS there's something called Whitebox that we've used. The input data, as I said, the obliques, the lidars, and so on. The process was it's call it simple, but it's you start off with a basic technical run to do a classification. You interpret what the tool gives you back, and then you tweak, and then you repeat, and you do this again and again and again, and you do this for every one of the layers. Now, my opinion about this at this stage is that it's probably still early days, and maybe what we're doing is fairly new. And I'm trying to find a different AI tool to be able to do the interpretation, because what we're getting is okay, but it takes a lot of learning. Now, I'm also aware that in future, if we keep redoing this, it will get better and better. But in terms of getting the AI to recognize, now let me explain. So we want it to recognize a pipe and verify that the pipe that's put in the ground is the pipe that was designed to go into the ground. I want AI to recognize that. And it will do that in various different ways, and some of the information was quite interesting that it came up with. But at this stage, it is an experiment, and I thought I'd just tell people about this, and then ask some questions. So the questions I have for the audience is there anybody else out there that has looked at something like this, or is considering automated as-built processes? Is there anybody that's considering that you know of? And would that be interesting for you guys? So, and I'd invite you to put yourself off mute and respond.
Yeah, Gabby, I had a question. My name's Darcy. Yeah, just wondering so when you get the LiDAR, for categorizing the different asset classes, does the line work, not the fields or the attributes, but does the line work come out pretty good? Are you pretty happy with the output you're getting just from the line work side of it?
It obviously depends on how high you fly. And in some cases we got 2 centimeter resolution in terms of the points with which we were able to classify quite successfully. The problem with that is the moment you fly a little bit lower to get the better resolution, the size of the data that goes up for the area that you're working with. But yes, we were quite happy. What is nice about this is that you for the bigger things, and if I say bigger things, the things that we've tried initially was like conduits. And with conduits, we could identify, when a conduit is in an open trench, you can identify that it is a conduit, and you can probably measure off it. Not always as accurate as what we wanted, but when it comes to pipe work, the results was quite usable. Anybody else?
Gabby.
So, yep.
Sorry, how did you get the contractors to leave the holes open long enough for you to take the drone over the top? In my experience, they don't leave them open more than a couple of hours. You'd have to have a lot of photos to make sure you got everything.
Well, there was this is a very good question, Dale, or very good comment. So
I'd have to agree. Yeah, same thing. Yeah, so from our A-SPEC work, yeah.
Yeah, from previous experience, I said to the guys, that's going to be a problem. And so we had an agreement with everybody, if there's an opening, that they, before closure, they have to book the LiDAR work, and they have, so that 2 hours, they have to give us a 2-hour window. Sometimes it was like a 20-minute window, but because it was part of the agreement, the contractual agreement up front, that wasn't such a big problem. What was a problem for us was we didn't have enough batteries, because the site, the work is happening in different places, and sometimes it happens that 2 teams are finishing at the same time, sort of, and you've got to go from the one to the other. And there were cases where, what I should also mention, part of the agreement was also that if we missed our window, we missed our window, but that it happened 2 or 3 times, that people started closing up, but we did have surveyors in there to at least do some basic validation, but if it wasn't part of the agreement, the upfront agreement, I think we would have had a lot more problems.
And the design data, you mentioned you managed to get it into some sort of geo-package format. We're lucky to get PDFs, designs these days for some projects. How do you see that as being, well, I see that as being a potential issue, is just, getting that design data. I guess there's also the temptation or the problem that turns into circular reasoning when filling out the as-con from the design, if the design is got all the attributing built in.
Dale, that's also quite an important one. This company is on board. They want to get to a point where they automate their process, but they also have, they also want to make money, and in the process they want to, they want to get the balance between those. And one of our discussions up front was the geo packages that we created were not available for the final as constructed, because we also had same surveyors who worked with it. They were not allowed to use that for their as constructed data, because of the integrity of the whole process. So that geo package was only used for the Google AI process. But hopefully in future that might change. I say hopefully. It'll be interesting to watch. Okay, next, anybody else?
Excellent. Well, it's
okay.
Like it's a wrap. Gabby, do you have anything else you want to add to that, or you've exhausted your wealth of knowledge?
I can tell I haven't exhausted my wealth of knowledge, but I don't want to bore people, because I think the rest is pretty boring. I did have a slide about questions, and there is also George asked me to talk very quickly about, and I'll take it off share, because otherwise you just look at a blank screen now. George also asked me to briefly touch on what happens when councils want part of A-SPEC only. So a council decides they only need a subset of the A-SPEC data set. Another council says, oh, well, we want more. And so the surveyor sits in between, and they've got to provide some data they're going to provide a subset, and then for the next council, they have to provide more. that messes up their internal processing. Everybody wants to do automation, but it's not just the automation. Is also we want to manage our processes so that we know that the data that we deliver is clean and accurate. And so what do we do about that? And from my experience, quite often councils who say that they want to have more, it's happened several times that people actually misunderstood existing assets or existing attributes, and what they wanted was actually provided, but it was just named something differently, or they didn't like the way it was provided, and councils needed to just make a change on their side. That's the one part. The other part is that now, Dale, I know that you don't like the standard to change, and for there to be new versions. But from an A-SPEC perspective, the standard needs to grow to keep up with changes in modern technology, and things like that. And I would argue that we should keep the standard pretty basic and not go and change it completely from year to year. That shouldn't happen. It should always be backwards compatible, and the changes shouldn't be massive. But we do want, if a council needs data that is not provided by A-SPEC, I think at least there should be a discussion with the rest of the community about the use of that data, because quite often that might be data that other people would also find useful. Talking about A-SPEC and call it an A-SPEC Plus. Before you do the Plus, I think it's important that we try and standardize on one spec, and if we really need to change it, let's change the spec and get that extra data. The part of not using all of the data, I have also seen councils that they scramble. In fact, I'm working with a council right now that's scrambling for some data that they actually received. At the time that they received it, they didn't think that they'll ever use this data, and now they're going back and say, how can we re-engineer? Can we, because they've also thrown away the original as-builts. So like some of you've mentioned, you wonder whether the data sits on a memory stick. I once actually got to a council with a drawer full of CDs. This was in the years of the CDs, a drawer full of CDs, and it was like 3-4 years worth. And then no, they'll get to it, and they never did. I think they eventually lost the CDs in a move from one building to another. And the point I'm making is that there comes a point in time where when you go back and you say, oh, but this would have been important information or good information to have. And so for us, what we are proposing to people is to build a repository for your A-SPEC data. I refer to it as an A-SPEC staging database, a database where your as-constructed data finds a home, and that becomes the source of truth. And if you have that as a centralized database, what you're then able to do is, if your systems, the different systems that you're using, your asset management, your GIS or financial systems, they don't need all the bits and pieces of A-SPEC. But if you keep the source of truth, then you can extract what you need and use it within the other system without fear of loss down the line. And that's just to, in terms of that whole discussion of should councils ask for more or should they ask for less? And so the comment is, it is a standard, let's standardize, and that makes it easier for everybody. And a staging database will certainly help you to secure the source of truth of that data. And that's really a wrap from me. Any other comments or questions?
Great, thank you. Thanks,
Thanks,
Gaby.
Kelly.
Someone did ask if a rough costing on the drones and accessories, but I guess you can get to that when you are at that point in terms of costing it out, unless you have those. Otherwise, did you want to put your questionnaire slides up for people to answer before we wrap up?
No, I'm good. You mean the poll questions that you guys have?
For you as well. You had some in there.
Yeah, please put that up. And I'll while you do that, I'll comment. The matrice with the entire stack was cost over $350,000 US. So you're not talking about a cheap process, but that included radios and a lot.
Thanks, Gaby. You want to put those Mentis up, please, Natalie? And so Gaby just had some questions. Your Mentis bombed. Gaby has some questions about design software. If you want to care to answer those Mentis really quickly, that'd be great. And if we can refresh that screen, even better. Yeah, excellent. So we'll run that through, and then we'll give that a minute. So which software
design? On to the next one now, Shane.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, just go through, and people, if you could just answer those. And then following those questions, there's a couple of questions around our speakers. If you could please fill those out, that'd be great. And then hopefully we'll all see you next week at the, is it S&W next week?
That's right. I think Shane's going to do a wrap up, Kelly. So we'll
fantastic. Yep, great.
We'll go through these Gaby slides. I'm just moving through them in the background here.
Fantastic.
So if you want to move on to the next one, Shane, the next slide.
What survey hardware do you normally use? Is that what we're up to?
Yes, and then I've got one more after that. If people want to add in any information they're wanting to hear about from Gaby from a technical session, you can drop in topics that you might like to hear about.
Great.
And then it's over to you, Shane, for your wrap up.
Hey, the wrap up. Just to reiterate, the codeless spreadsheet is continually being updated, so please make yourself familiar with this through the web app or the API. All subscribers to the specifications will be provided access as part of their subscription to the specifications, and this will be provided by Digital Hive. Gaby is the point of contact to make sure you have access to this. So what is next? A-SPEC, part of continuous improvement coming up next. New specification. At times, GISA is asked to include a new asset class that does not necessarily fit into any of the current specifications. A-SPEC is being launched with the initial asset class of fuel tanks, combustible liquid tanks. EV charging stations will be linked to R-Spec, and solar farms will be a longer time frame as we determine the most appropriate spec, maybe under a future E-SPEC for energy. What can you expect with A-SPEC? The X-Files. That's what George left us with. So yeah, the next forum will be A-SPEC and W-SPEC on the 4th of September. Sewer and water has been combined into one session this year. And then if you haven't already, sign up for the showcase, which is on the 11th of September. Before we say goodbye, there's some final polls. So please rate our sessions. Natalie, if you want to
Yes, I've popped up Shane's one. If you click on that, it should come up, Shane. And then
there we go.
It's all anonymous, so just throw your stars in, and thank you all for coming along. We'll quickly whiz through to each of the events, and then if you could rate them, that's great. And we'll be sending out the presentation. I think, are we setting out the presentations, Natalie?
So the presentations will be, yep, no, sorry, I'm not on mute. The presentations will be available on the YouTube channel after the forums conclude. From here, everyone that was online today will receive an email to see if they want a certificate of attendance for CPD points, and we will get them to you within the next week once you've replied that you want them. And then otherwise, we look forward to seeing people next week for S&W, and then the showcase the following week to wrap up the series.
Wonderful. Thanks, everyone. See you all next week.